Gerald Green to inbound. Harden trying to get free. Down to three, down to two. It's a three. Good! Good! He got it! James Harden, a flamethrower! Incredible shot! Rockets by one with 1 second to go!
In the second half of the 2019 NBA season, something happened that we had never seen in the last 75 years of the NBA. Reigning MVP of the league, James Harden was on a scoring streak comparable to the late great Wilt Chamberlain, putting up 43 points a game, and teams were scrambling to find a way to contain him. But the way they tried to stop this man was one of the most unconventional ways we have ever seen. James Harden was torching the league by averaging a staggering 43.6 points for a month straight, which included 14 games. Many teams saw this and were racking their brains making new defensive game plans to try to slow him down, because at this point there was no stopping him. Teams started guarding him in weird ways. Before I talk about this, I want to give you a little bit of a backstory of how we got to this point. The 2019 NBA season was the year after James Harden won his MVP, and his signature move, the step back, had revolutionized the league. In the 2013-14 season, Stephen Curry led the NBA in stepbacks with only 69, and 5 years later in the 2018-19 season, Harden led the league with 613. 613 is insanity. That is almost 9 times more than Stephen Curry had 5 years prior. Here are some pictures that'll show you how ahead of the league he was. There were many factors that contributed to his scoring outbreak. One of the main factors was how much switching was going on in the league at this time. Everybody was guarding everyone as we moved towards a more positionless era of basketball. This naturally led to more isoing due to such heavy mismatches. One example of this would be Roy Hibbert guarding a guard, or Tyson Chandler guarding James Harden, for example. Now, both of these players in their career have been Hall of Famers, but they have no business guarding guards on the perimeter. Their lateral quickness just isn't fast enough to keep up. Another contributing factor to this is James Harden's left-handedness. He is left-handed, which means you're harder to guard just because of your unorthodox movement compared to other players in the league. Also, defending people while they're shooting left-handed is much harder than guarding people right-handed, mainly because when you're taught young, it's easy to get your hand on the side of the shooter, but when you're guarding a left-handed shooter, it's completely opposite. Also at this time, the Rockets have been revolutionizing the way of basketball was played. Due to the rise of analytics, this gave James Harden a unique playing style that we've never seen before. His play style is threes, shots in the paints, and free throws. No mid-range jumpers. Tell me, do you honestly remember the last time James Harden consistently took mid-range jumpers? I'm not talking about floaters either. He does this partially because the defense collapses him, which stops him from driving to the basket, which is smart, but this led to Clint Capella lobs, which contributed to Harden's 7.5 assists on the season. He's also so efficient for where he took his shots from. His shot collection was better than Kobe's by eliminating the mid-range, and he took 11 free throws a game, which is around the same number of free throws as Prime Shaq. Due to these factors, I mentioned a lot of switching, his left-handedness, his isolation style in Houston. This led him to dribbling the ball more than 500 times a game, and 70% of the times led to him shooting. Because of all the things I previously mentioned, literally teams could not figure out how to defend him. It was either you let him dribble you to sleep, then step back, which on average created 6 feet of separation, and on those step backs he would get fouled 60% of the time, or you let him go past you and get a layup or take foul shots. Or lastly, your last line of defense, he would kick it out to the corner or he'd throw a lob to his big man. This led him to average 36 points on the season. Now, let's do some math real quick. If he only shot 3-pointers, which is the most points you can make on a shot, that's a minimum of 12 shots all makes. Think about how wild that is. So teams were at a loss of what to do with him. They even had Scottie Pippen trying to break down what to do to guard this man, with Tracy McGrady on ESPN.
First of all, you have to start guarding James Harden when he get out of his car going into the arena.
When your team scores the basket, you finding James Harden. You're picking up 94 feet.
Yes, even if he's in the parking lot, I'm coming to find him.
He gets the ball past half court. He's isoing you. Are you going to come up?
I will attack his left hand and force him to beat me right. And I will give him not completely direct line to the basket, but almost inviting him to go take a layup.
Now I'm James. Me to take a double step back.
Yes.
I'm going to create so much space, you're not going to be able to bother my shot.
I will play James Harden from behind. I will be able to bother his shot because I will play him to force him into driving and I'll just sit on his right shoulder all night. I don't.
They were looking to a 10-time defensive player that retired 14 years before this season. As I previously mentioned, Pippen had told the NBA how to guard Harden. This brief segment of him talking to T-Mac, a quote that stuck out to me was, "Guard him for the moment he gets out of his car." Now finally, after all that backstory, I want to give you 3 scenarios that I want to talk about. The very first one is a popular game between the Rockets and Lakers on December 19th, 2019. This is a well-named game because of the number of fouls that were called, and the famous picture of LeBron guarding with his hands behind his back. This was the turning point for most Houston Rocket haters. They didn't like how James Harden was manipulating the game so much to the point where people had to guard with their hands behind their back. This was also the game that determined the foul calling for the next 3 years. Luckily, the past few years there's been steps to reverse these changes that they made. The main thing that people were complaining about was the arm wrapping. Whenever James Harden and CP3 would go for a layup, the amount of ticky-tack fouls for basically doing nothing rendered defenses useless, leading to lots of complaints, so much the very next day on ESPN, Stephen A. Smith had something to say. Now I know Stephen A. Smith isn't exactly the best source for basketball information, but I think it's important because this really changed how teams were going to defend them.
The Los Angeles Lakers watched as James Harden basically converted 18 to 19 free throws. He ended up in the 2 meetings that he's had this year, James Harden by himself has shot 34 free throws. The Lakers, led by LeBron James, became so frustrated, they took their hands and put it behind their backs to play defense. My issue with it more than anything else, too many calls are being made. The referees interrupt action too much for too many ticky-tack fouls.
A few days later, the Rockets played the 76ers, and this game is famously known because of the way Corey Brewer guarded him. This man, Corey Brewer, dunked the ball on a fast break off of a steal, got up, and went to guard him. It was one of those fast breaks too, where usually teams would call a timeout after, but no, he ran straight towards James Harden, picking him up at his own three-point line, which irritated him, leading to getting an offensive foul. There are other moments in the game that stood out that I'll show. However, even with this type of defense, Harden still dropped 37. I mean, what else can you say about James? He's literally being guarded someone that's fighting for a 10-day contract, and he still does his thing, dropping 37 points. But be honest, those clips have to make you, at least smile. He's flopping on inbound passes, he's getting up, chasing this man down, he's trying his best, and it still wasn't enough. Now you're probably thinking, there's no way anybody can stop him. If people are literally guarding him from end line to end line, who can stop him? Then, there was one team that actually figured it out. A game later that year between the Rockets and Bucks would show the league how to guard Harden. They had taken what Scottie Pippen had said earlier that year by guarding him on his side and letting him drive to the basket, then collapsing, forcing him to kick out. Now this wasn't a foolproof strategy as he still was able to get assists, but they did slow down his scoring some. Another factor that isn't mentioned much is the Bucks did have Brook Lopez, who is an underrated defender that he doesn't get enough credit for. This strategy of defending him from the side was so successful that teams started to adopt this style. This strategy was so successful that in the Jazz series versus the Rockets in the playoffs, this will be the golden standard of how to guard James Harden. The Jazz implemented this strategy the whole series and it worked, even though they lost 4-1. If you look at the stats, you'll probably say that he had a good series because he averaged 28, but he only shot 37% from the field compared to his season average of 36 points on 44% shooting. I'll go game by game and I'll make more sense. In Game 1, he shot 11 for 26. Game 2, 11 for 24. Game 4, 8 for 19. In Game 5, 10 for 26. And you don't have to be a super basketball fan to know that that's pretty bad shooting. If you were paying attention, there was one game that I kept out, and that was Game 3. This is the best defense that Harden has ever seen, and to this day, I still think it's one of the best defenses he's ever faced. The Jazz held him to 3 for 20. He ended with 22 points, however, because of 14 free throws. The second play of the game, they triple-teamed this man near half court. He didn't make field goals until the fourth quarter, and the Rockets still won. A little sidetrack, but this is one of my favorite Rockets games of the James Harden era because it showed how good this team really was. Even though James Harden didn't score 40 or 50 or 60, they were still able to pull out a game. This video's whole point is mainly to show just how dominant James Harden was, that he had defensive switching strategies, guarding him from the side, guarding him from behind, letting him take mid-range jumpers just so they could slow him down. One last thing. I think that year, James Harden should have won back-to-back MVPs. This is arguably a better year than his first MVP. Like, think of the last time people were letting him take mid-range shots. They were giving him layups. You never do that unless you have a good reason, and that reason, the whole league feared James Harden, so they had to let him do that. Honestly, to me, he could be dark horse for MVP. He'll put up the assist numbers with Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, Tyrese Maxey. He'll get a few rebounds, and I'm sure he'll get a bunch of points because the lane will just open up with a number of scorers around him.